There was a time so distant that no written memory could reach it, and no carved stone had yet learned to keep the names of those who walked beneath the patient sky. It was an age that drifted quietly between one world and another, when the last great breath of the ice still lingered across the far northern horizon, and yet almost too gently to notice. That ancient kingdom of frost had already begun its endless surrender to time. No one living beside the quiet rivers could have imagined the scale of those frozen mountains beyond the edge of their knowing. No one could have understood that each passing season, each faint warmth carried by the returning sun, released another invisible thread of water from the sleeping glaciers. The change was so slow that even centuries seemed hurried beside it. Far away, where silence stretched across endless fields of white beneath pale stars, ancient walls of ice rested upon the earth with unimaginable weight. Their frozen surfaces shimmered beneath the low light of dawn and dusk alike, unmoving to the eyes of any creature that might have wandered near them. Yet deep within those frozen bodies, tiny streams had already awakened. They slipped quietly through hidden tunnels beneath crystal ceilings, carrying droplets that had remained imprisoned since winters beyond counting. Each drop joined another. Each narrow trickle became a slightly broader stream. Each stream wandered patiently toward distant rivers that themselves wandered patiently toward seas that waited without hurry. Nothing happened quickly. Nothing needed to. The earth itself seemed content to breathe at a pace slower than memory. Far to the south, where forests spread like dark blankets over gentle hills, another evening settled across a peaceful valley. The fading daylight softened every edge until the world appeared wrapped inside layers of quiet gray. The air had become heavy during the afternoon, rich with the scent of damp soil, crushed grass, cooled stone, and distant water. Clouds drifted so slowly overhead that they hardly appeared to move at all. Even the birds crossing the sky seemed reluctant to disturb the stillness gathering. Beneath them, the people of the valley knew nothing of distant glaciers. Their lives followed smaller rhythms. They knew the paths where deer walked. They knew the places where fish gathered beneath slow currents. They knew which trees bent earliest beneath autumn winds, and which flowers returned after the longest winters. These were the measurements of their world. As twilight deepened, hunters returned one by one, along narrow trails that disappeared into the surrounding woodland. Their footsteps were unhurried. Spears rested across tired shoulders, polished smooth by years of careful hands. Small bundles of gathered roots and berries swung gently with each slow step. No one spoke loudly. Voices rose only softly before fading once again into the growing quiet, as though even conversation understood that the evening belonged more completely to silence than to words. Children who had spent the day exploring the edges of the meadow no longer ran across the grass. Their movements slowed naturally with the fading light. Curiosity dissolved into contentment. One by one, they settled beside their families, watching glowing embers breathe within small circles of carefully gathered stone. The fires had burned brightly only a short while before. Now they glowed lower. The tallest flames disappeared first. Bright oranges softened into deep reds. Deep reds settled into gentle crimson beneath thin layers of white ash. Occasionally, a single branch shifted within the fire, with the quietest crackle imaginable, releasing a small spiral of sparks that floated upward before vanishing into the cool evening air. Smoke rose almost perfectly straight. There was hardly any wind. The forest watched without movement. Beyond the settlement, enormous trees stretched into the darkening sky. Their trunks carried centuries within their silent rings. Moss climbed patiently over rough bark. Ferns rested beneath wide branches where the last gray light gathered before, dissolving completely into shadow. Somewhere high above, unseen leaves touched one another with almost imperceptible whispers whenever the faintest breath of air drifted through the canopy. Those whispers came less and less often. The night seemed determined to arrive gently. The earth cooled slowly beneath bare feet. Moisture gathered across smooth stones beside the riverbank. Tiny beads of water formed upon blades of grass until each one reflected the dim remains of twilight-like, countless silent stars waiting patiently for darkness to complete their transformation. The river itself flowed with remarkable calm. It did not rush. It did not roar. It simply continued. Its surface carried long ribbons of reflected gray stretching endlessly downstream. Gentle ripples touched fallen branches before continuing onward with complete indifference. Occasionally, a fish disturbed the smooth water with the smallest circle, spreading outward again and again until it disappeared completely into the wider current. The people noticed none of this as unusual. The river had always been there. It had always risen. It had always fallen. It had always spoken in its soft, endless voice through every season they remembered. Yet somewhere beyond memory, beyond even the oldest stories shared beside winter fires, that familiar rhythm had begun to change. Not suddenly, never suddenly. The change was smaller than a single finger's width upon a riverside stone, smaller than the slow growth of moss across fallen wood, smaller than the yearly widening of an ancient oak. But it continued day after day, season after season, year after year. The water lingered just a little longer after each spring. It climbed just a little higher against familiar banks, places that once dried beneath summer. Sunlight remained damp for longer than anyone recalled. No one feared this. The earth simply seemed wetter. The mornings arrived, wrapped inside thicker veils of mist. The evenings carried heavier scents, rising from saturated soil. The marsh grasses spread farther into open ground than before, though their quiet advance escaped almost every eye. Beyond the forests lay a world that would one day vanish almost completely. It was a vast plain stretching toward horizons that seemed without end. Wide rivers wandered lazily across rich grasslands, before dividing into countless smaller channels glittering beneath pale skies. Herds of grazing animals crossed those open lands with patient certainty, following routes older than generations could remember. Small lakes reflected clouds drifting overhead. Low hills rolled gently toward distant coastlines, where fresh water slowly surrendered itself to the breathing tides of an ancient sea. Much later, those forgotten lands would receive another name. Many thousands of years later, people would call them Doggerland. But tonight, there were no names. Only earth, only sky, only water, only silence. The coastline itself seemed endless. Wide beaches stretched beyond sight, their damp sands marked by the careful footprints of birds, searching quietly among the retreating tide. Salt grasses bent almost imperceptibly beneath cool evening air. Beyond them, shallow pools reflected the first lonely stars emerging overhead. The sea breathed. Its waves arrived slowly, one after another, always returning, always withdrawing, always returning once again. No urgency disturbed that endless rhythm. The water simply continued its ancient conversation with the shore. Far offshore, hidden beneath gathering mist, the horizon slowly disappeared. Sea and sky blended into one continuous field of soft gray until no clear boundary remained between them. Distance itself seemed to dissolve. Then came the mist. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It arrived the way sleep enters a tired mind, almost unnoticed. At first, it appeared only as pale threads, resting low across the wetlands. Gentle ribbons drifted between reeds, where quiet birds had already tucked their heads beneath folded wings. The mist moved without sound. It seemed less like weather than memory itself, returning to places long forgotten. Minute by minute, it thickened. Slowly, it spread. It slipped across open meadows. It crossed silent streams. It curled around weathered stones. It climbed gradually into the forest, where every trunk became softer, every branch more distant, every shadow less certain than before. The settlement watched the world disappear, not with fear, only with quiet acceptance. The familiar trees beyond the nearest clearing faded into pale shapes. Then those shapes faded further still. Soon, only the closest firelight remained visible, glowing softly inside an ocean of white. Voices became quieter. People naturally leaned closer together, not because danger approached, but because the mist seemed to ask gently for softer sounds. Somewhere beyond the white veil, an owl called once. The sound lingered. It drifted through unseen branches before fading into such complete silence that even memory struggled to hold it. The river continued, always the river. Its endless movement became even more noticeable after sight surrendered itself to the fog. Hidden now from view, the water seemed larger than before. Its steady rhythm echoed gently across the valley, surrounding every listener with slow, patient repetition. Flow, pause, flow, pause, flow again. Each quiet current brushed against stones, polished smooth by centuries of passing water. Each ripple continued onward toward distant lowlands, toward marshes, toward estuaries, toward the waiting sea. Above, darkness deepened almost without color. Gray became charcoal. Charcoal became soft black, touched only by the faintest silver, lingering. Along the western horizon, one by one, the earliest stars appeared overhead, though even they seemed muted through the gathering veil of moisture covering the sky. The air cooled further. Breathing became visible. Each slow exhale drifted gently into the mist before becoming indistinguishable from the countless other invisible breaths rising quietly from rivers, lakes, forests, wetlands, and the sleeping earth itself. Everything seemed to breathe together. The trees, the river, the sea, the stones, the people, even the mist appeared alive, with slow inhalations and patient exhalations that never truly began and never truly ended. Far beyond every visible horizon, the glaciers continued melting. Another drop joined another stream. Another stream joined another river. Another river carried its quiet burden toward oceans already, beginning their almost unimaginable rise. But here in this valley, upon this peaceful evening, no one could yet hear the distant promise hidden within those waters. Only the river spoke. Only the mist drifted. Only the embers glowed softly beneath. Deepening night as the first forgotten lands settled gently into sleep, unaware that the vast waters had already begun their endless journey toward them. The mist continued its patient work long after every voice had faded into silence. It asked nothing of the valley. It hurried nothing. It simply drifted farther, deeper, softer, until every familiar path disappeared beneath its pale embrace. The nearest trees became faint shadows. Those beyond them dissolved completely. The river itself vanished from sight, though its quiet presence remained as certain as breathing, hidden beneath layers of cool, white air that seemed to belong less to the earth than to some forgotten dream lingering between waking and sleep. Nothing struggled against the night. Nothing resisted its gentle arrival. The world simply became quieter still. The ancient oaks that had watched over this valley for centuries stood motionless beneath the gathering darkness. Their immense trunks rose like silent pillars into branches that no longer reached toward visible stars. Leaves rested without movement. The slightest evening breeze had long since wandered elsewhere, leaving every branch suspended in perfect stillness. Moisture gathered upon every surface. Tiny droplets formed along rough bark. Moss drank quietly from the cooling air. Ferns bent beneath the increasing weight of dew until their delicate fronds almost touched the dark earth below. The forest no longer seemed made of trees. It seemed made of silence itself. Somewhere deep within those hidden woods, small creatures had already settled beneath roots, beneath fallen branches, beneath soft blankets of leaves, carried there through many autumns. Their breathing slowed with the cooling night. Even the insects, whose endless songs had gently accompanied the fading evening, now sang less often. Their rhythms stretched farther apart. One gentle sound lingered before another, answered from some invisible corner of the forest. Then, longer silence followed. Then, another quiet voice. Then, silence again. Everything became slower. Everything became heavier. Everything seemed content simply to remain. Within the settlement, the final campfires surrendered themselves, one glowing ember at a time. The bright flames had vanished completely. The deep red glow faded into darker crimson. Dark crimson softened into quiet gray. Gray settled beneath thin blankets of white ash that reflected what little light remained from the hidden sky above. Occasionally, so gently that no sleeping ear could hear it, a small piece of charcoal folded inward upon itself. A tiny breath of warmth escaped. A final thread of smoke rose only a short distance before disappearing into the waiting mist. Then, even that was gone. The circles of stone surrounding each fire remained warm for a little while longer. Heat rested patiently inside them, slowly returning to the earth from which those stones had once been gathered. One by one, they cooled beneath the damp night air until their surfaces carried the same quiet chill. As the riverbank beyond the settlement, the warmth left them without haste. Everything left without haste. Nearby, simple shelters rested beneath heavy coverings of woven branches. Animal hides, reeds, and carefully placed grasses gathered through many seasons. Inside them, the warmth of sleeping bodies lingered gently. Soft breathing rose and fell with remarkable patience. One sleeper inhaled deeply. Another answered with a quieter breath. Children rested close beside parents. Elders dreamed beneath blankets of carefully prepared furs. No words disturbed their sleep. Only breathing. Always breathing. Slow, gentle, steady. The rhythm repeated again and again until it became almost impossible to separate the breathing of the people from the breathing of the valley itself. Outside, the river continued its endless journey. Its surface remained hidden beneath the fog, yet every quiet current could still be heard. Water slipped around smooth stones, polished by centuries of patient movement. It brushed gently against fallen branches, resting half beneath the current. Tiny ripples crossed invisible pools before fading into larger waters farther downstream. The river never paused. It never questioned its direction. It simply continued. Beyond every bend waited another bend. Beyond every quiet pool waited another current. Beyond every valley waited another plain. Beyond every plain waited another river. And beyond them all, the sea waited, far away, beyond forests and marshes, beyond broad meadows, where ancient herds had wandered beneath forgotten summers. The coastline rested beneath the same blanket of mist. The tides were changing, not dramatically, not violently, simply, steadily. The sea inhaled, then slowly exhaled. Its immense body shifted against the waiting shore with quiet determination older than memory itself. Another gentle wave reached slightly farther across damp sand before retreating once more. Then another, then another. Each one appeared almost identical to the last, yet each left behind the faintest trace of change. A shell rested somewhere new. A smooth stone turned quietly beneath the water. A narrow channel deepened by less than the width of a finger. No eye could have measured it. No heart could have feared it. The sea simply continued its endless, breathing beneath the invisible pole of the distant moon. Above that hidden coast, fog thickened until horizon and ocean disappeared together. Sea merged into sky without edge or boundary. Darkness itself seemed to become liquid, flowing silently over beaches and tidal flats before drifting inland across reeds, grasses, forests, and rivers alike. The ancient lands stretched peacefully beneath this quiet veil. Wide plains reached toward unseen distances, where rivers divided again and again into shining branches, feeding marshes rich with life. Countless generations had crossed those open landscapes. Herds had wandered there. Birds had nested there. Children had learned to walk there. Fires had burned beneath endless evenings like this one. The earth remembered all of them. The earth hurried none of them. Time itself seemed unwilling to disturb such patient places. Yet, somewhere beyond every visible horizon, the glaciers continued melting. Far beneath towering cliffs of ancient ice, hidden streams carried crystal water through winding tunnels carved inside. Frozen mountains, older than memory. Those streams joined others. They became rivers that crossed vast northern plains beneath pale skies, where almost no human footsteps had ever fallen. Day after day, season after season, century after century, the water traveled. It asked permission from no kingdom. It carried no banner. It announced no arrival. It simply moved, always downward, always onward, always toward the waiting sea. The same water touched stone after stone, river after river, lake after lake. Each quiet current joined another, until the entire earth seemed woven together by invisible threads of flowing water, stretching from the heart of the ancient ice to the breathing edge of the endless ocean. Nothing interrupted this journey. Nothing could. The tribe slept more deeply. Dreams settled gently upon them, like another layer of mist. Perhaps one dreamed of following deer across bright summer grasslands. Perhaps another wandered beside rivers beneath warm sunlight. Perhaps the oldest dreamed of winters long forgotten, when snow had reached higher upon distant hills. Dreams came softly. Dreams departed softly. No dream lasted forever. The night accepted each one without judgment before, carrying it quietly away into darkness. The air grew cooler still. Riverstone surrendered the last memory of daytime warmth. Each smooth surface became damp with dew until touching them would have felt like touching quiet water itself. Along the muddy banks, reeds stood motionless. Tiny drops gathered at the tips of every blade, before growing heavier and finally slipping. Silently, into the unseen current below. Drop after drop, one becoming another, another becoming many. The smallest rhythms echoed the largest. Water falling, water flowing, water gathering, water returning. Above the valley, even the stars disappeared. One after another, they faded behind. Thickening fog, until the heavens became a single, endless ceiling of gentle darkness. No moonlight reached the earth. No distant constellation guided unseen travelers. The sky itself seemed to withdraw into perfect silence, leaving only the feeling of its endless presence above the sleeping world. Darkness no longer felt empty. It felt full, full of quiet, full of patience, full of slow, immeasurable time. The valley rested within it without fear. The forest rested, the river rested, though it never ceased moving. The sea rested, though every tide continued its endless pulse. Even the unseen glaciers rested, while quietly becoming rivers. The whole world seemed to breathe with one enormous, peaceful rhythm. Inhale, the river carried another quiet current. Exhale, the sea welcomed another gentle wave. Inhale, another drop escaped the northern ice. Exhale, another tide reached softly across the ancient shore. Again and again and again. The rhythm had no beginning. It had no ending. It had simply always been. Mist settled more heavily across the forgotten plains that one distant age would remember as Doggerland. Marsh grasses disappeared beneath white silence. Quiet streams lost themselves inside pale shadows. Broad meadows, where countless footsteps had crossed through forgotten generations, became hidden beneath a single, unbroken blanket of night. Nothing remained to see. Nothing remained to follow. Only the feeling of the earth itself endured. Deep beneath the soil, unseen water drifted patiently through layers of sand and stone laid, down by older rivers whose names had never existed. Above, sleeping roots reached slowly through darkness, drinking without hurry from the cool ground. Great oaks stood watch over centuries they could never count. Moss continued its silent work upon fallen logs. Tiny seeds rested beneath damp leaves, waiting for springs not yet imagined. Everything waited. Everything trusted time. The sleeping people knew none of the vast distances through which the waters already traveled. They knew only this valley, this forest, this river, this comforting darkness. Their breathing slowed even further. The valley answered. The river answered. The sea answered. The earth itself seemed to answer with one long, quiet breath that stretched so gently across the ancient world that it became impossible to know whether it belonged to the sleeping tribe, the hidden forests, the distant glaciers, or the endless waters, slowly drawing every horizon together beneath the deep and timeless night. And so the darkness settled completely. The mist no longer drifted. It simply rested. The fires no longer glowed. They slept beneath soft, silver ash. The stars no longer shone. They waited, unseen, beyond the quiet veil. The river flowed. The sea breathed. The ice melted. The earth dreamed. And the first lands of the ancient world surrendered themselves completely to the perfect stillness of the endless night. Many thousands of years passed as quietly as the turning of a sleeping body beneath a warm blanket. Seasons came and went beyond counting. Forests slowly became fields. Rivers wandered across their floodplains, leaving behind rich layers of dark earth. Countless generations were born, lived gentle lives beneath familiar skies, and returned peacefully to the soil from which new grasses continued to grow. The forgotten plains beneath the northern seas rested forever beneath silent water, their paths and campfires, hidden beneath waves that remembered everything without speaking of it. The rivers, however, remembered. They remembered every mountain they had descended from. They remembered every valley they had crossed. They remembered every forgotten settlement whose reflections had once rested upon their quiet surfaces, always flowing, always carrying, always listening. And so the slow passage of ages brought the story southward, toward a land where two great rivers wandered, patiently through broad plains beneath immense skies. Here the earth was warm beneath the daytime sun, yet wonderfully gentle beneath the coming night. The rivers spread themselves across fertile lands with quiet generosity, dividing into countless canals that carried life toward orchards, fields, gardens, and distant villages. The people who lived here called upon the rivers each morning and thanked them each evening, for everything green depended upon their patient arrival. Night approached this ancient land just as slowly as it had once approached the forgotten valley long ago. The light softened. The air grew heavier. The colors of the earth settled into deeper shades of bronze, amber, and quiet gray before gently surrendering themselves to darkness. Upon the broad banks of the Euphrates, an ancient city rested with complete confidence beneath the endless sky. Its walls, built patiently from countless sun-dried mud bricks, glowed softly beneath the fading light before gradually cooling beneath the first quiet breath of evening. Every brick held the warmth of the long day. Every wall released that warmth, little by little, into the gathering night. Nothing hurried. Nothing resisted. The city simply exhaled. Its streets, lively beneath the afternoon sun, slowly emptied. Sandals brushed softly across packed earth as the final workers returned home through narrow lanes winding between homes whose flat roofs welcomed the evening air. Conversations became fewer. Laughter drifted once or twice above distant courtyards before dissolving into peaceful silence. The city knew this rhythm well. Every evening unfolded almost exactly like the one before. Every night settled with the same patient certainty. Above the rooftops rose the great ziggurat. Its immense terraces climbed carefully toward the stars in slow, measured steps, each level resting upon another with quiet dignity. Built by countless hands over many seasons, its broad mud brick faces carried the memory of endless summers beneath the burning sun. Now those ancient walls surrendered their stored warmth to the cooler air with extraordinary patience. Stone by stone, brick by brick, breath by breath, the great structure seemed almost alive, not because it moved, but because it rested so deeply within the passing hours. High above the sleeping streets, gentle breezes touched the upper terraces first. They carried faint scents, drifting across the city, the sweetness of ripe dates hanging in nearby growths, the damp fragrance rising from irrigation canals, fresh clay slowly drying inside shaded courtyards, warm reeds gathered earlier that day beside quiet marshes, and beneath every scent, the river, always the river. Its presence could be heard long before it could be seen. The Euphrates flowed without, hurried beside wooden docks, where boats now rested after carrying grain, reeds, pottery, fish, wool, and carefully carved timber throughout the day. Thick ropes held the vessels, quietly against polished posts, worn, smoothed by generations of careful hands. The water touched them gently, again and again. Each small wave arrived softly against the wood before retreating into darkness. Each ripple repeated another. Each quiet sound became almost impassable to separate from breathing itself. Closer to the riverbank, narrow irrigation canals reached patiently into the surrounding fields. During daylight, they had carried shimmering water toward growing barley, onions, lentils, flax, and gardens filled with herbs whose gentle fragrances lingered even after sunset. Now the farmers had gone home. Simple wooden gates controlling the canals rested exactly where careful hands had left them. Water continued flowing, always flowing, never asking whether anyone watched. The fields themselves seemed asleep. Broad leaves no longer stirred beneath busy hands gathering harvests. Tall reeds beside the canals stood perfectly still. Occasionally, one leaned ever so slightly beneath its own growing weight before returning once again to quiet balance. Nothing more happened. Nothing more needed to happen. Night was enough. Within the marketplace, woven baskets rested where merchants had carefully stacked them before leaving. Empty reed mats covered the ground where countless conversations had filled the warm afternoon. Clay jars stood patiently beneath simple awnings. Bundles of woven rushes leaned against quiet walls. Earlier, voices had echoed between these buildings. Children had laughed. Animals had wandered patiently through open spaces. Buyers had examined fresh fish shining beside damp reeds. Potters had displayed smooth bowls, still carrying traces of warm sunlight. Now, only silence remained. The market itself seemed to sleep. Nearby, rows of reeds gathered from marshes beyond. The city rested in neat bundles awaiting another morning. Their sweet, earthy scent lingered gently beneath the cooling air. Somewhere hidden within them, tiny insects settled without movement. The night accepted everything equally. The rich houses, the humble homes, the silent workshops, the empty market, the towering temples. Every roof cooled together beneath the growing darkness. Within the scribes' quarter, Lamps had burned late into the evening. Patient hands had pressed careful, wedge-shaped marks into soft clay while daylight slowly faded. Beyond open doorways, each tablet carried agreements, harvest records, prayers, hymns, stories, names, numbers, and quiet memories that the people hoped would outlive their own brief lifetimes. Now, the styluses rested. The scribes had washed the clay from their fingers. Fresh tablets lay side by side upon wooden shelves where they slowly hardened in peaceful darkness. Nothing more would be written tonight. The words themselves seemed asleep. Tiny grains of dust drifted almost, invisibly through the still air before settling, gently across unfinished work. Even memory rested. Farther within the city, small courtyards surrounded by mud brick. Homes glowed faintly beneath, oil lamps whose flames had grown low. Families gathered quietly after the long warmth of the day. Bread had already been shared. Dates rested inside woven bowls. Water jars stood cool beneath shaded walls. One by one, the lamps faded. One by one, the courtyards became dark. One by one, the homes surrendered themselves to silence. Soft breathing replaced conversation. Dreams replaced plans. Night replaced day with complete gentleness. Above it all, stretched the immense velvet sky. The stars appeared gradually, not all at once. The brightest emerged first, then others followed, then countless more, until the heavens seemed filled with quiet points of silver scattered across infinite darkness. High upon the uppermost terrace of the ziggurat, a handful of elderly astronomers remained awake. They had climbed these steps through many decades. They knew the patient paths followed by every familiar constellation. They knew the slow journeys of wandering planets. They knew how the moon returned faithfully through its endless cycles. They watched not because they hurried to discover something new. They watched because watching had become another form of peaceful breathing. Their robes stirred gently beneath the warm night air. Clay tablets rested nearby. Simple measuring cords lay carefully coiled beside them. No one spoke loudly. No one disturbed the immense quiet surrounding the temple heights. They simply looked upward, then downward, then upward once more. The rivers reflected faint starlight far below. Beyond the distant fields, where the great waterways slowly wandered toward the southern sea, something almost impossible to name lingered within the air. Not danger, not fear, only difference. The breeze carried unusual warmth, not the warmth left behind by the day's sun. Another warmth, a deeper warmth, one that seemed to have traveled an extraordinary distance before arriving here. The oldest among the watchers lifted his eyes toward the unseen mountains far beyond. Every visible horizon. Those mountains rested impossibly far away. Snow still crowned their highest peaks. Ancient rivers were born there. Every drop flowing beside this city had once begun its long journey among those distant heights. Tonight, the water felt different. No eye could truly see it. Yet every experienced heart beside the rivers sensed it quietly. The current seemed fuller, the flow seemed heavier. The gentle sound against the docks carried a lower tone than before, almost too soft to notice unless one had listened through countless seasons. The astronomers remained silent. They had learned long ago that the earth often whispered before it ever spoke. The southern wind returned. It drifted patiently across the upper terraces. It carried faint traces of salt from seas lying beyond the marshes at the edge of the world they knew. The scent lingered, then faded, then returned once again. One elder closed his eyes for a moment. He listened instead of looking. Below him, the Euphrates continued its endless conversation with the waiting land. Far away, the southern sea answered with its own slow breathing. Between them, invisible beyond mountains, valleys, tributaries, and forgotten distances, water continued its endless journey from places no traveler could ever visit in a single lifetime. The southern wind returned, shifting slowly through the darkness and drifting patiently across the uppermost terrace of the great ziggurat. It carried faint, unmistakable traces of salt from open seas lying far beyond the vast marshes at the edge of the world they knew, blending with the scent of cool river mud and drying palm leaves. The heavy scent lingered in the night air, then slowly faded, and then returned once again with the steady rhythm of a changing tide. One elder closed his eyes for a long moment, completely still, choosing to listen to the darkness instead of looking into the velvet sky. Below him, hidden beneath the thick veil of night, the Euphrates continued its endless, murmuring conversation with the waiting land, its dark waters reflecting nothing but the highest stars. Far away, past forgotten plains and sleeping villages, the southern sea answered with its own slow, heavy breathing against the distant shores. Between them, completely invisible beyond jagged mountains, quiet valleys, winding tributaries, and unimaginable distances, water continued its ancient, unstoppable journey from cold places no traveler could ever visit in a single lifetime. The river flowed without pause, the sea breathed its rhythmic tides, and the stars watched from the absolute silence of the heavens. And somewhere deep beneath memory itself, older than the first kingdoms, older than the oldest cities, older even than the first damp clay pressed by careful hands, the ancient echo of the rising waters stirred once more with such quiet, hypnotic patience that only the oldest listeners, sitting motionless atop the silent ziggurat, believed they could almost hear its distant and eternal whisper. The night deepened over the land of Sumer, spreading its heavy, velvet mantle from the heights of the ziggurat to the lowest banks of the ancient channels. The elderly watchers remained completely still, their shadows merging with the weathered mud brick floor as the stars above continued their slow, silent rotation across the heavens. Below them, the grand city had fully surrendered to the darkness, its thousands of sun-dried walls finally shedding the last remnants of the day's burning heat. The air grew thick and cool, carrying the dense, earthy scent of wet barley fields and the sweet, dark fragrance of resting date orchards. Inside the homes, The breathing of the sleeping. Families became perfectly synchronized with the quiet pulse of the city itself, a soft chorus of life, resting without fear beneath the ancient sky. In the scribe's quarter, the newly carved clay tablets settled deeper into the cool shadows of their wooden shelves, their hard edges slowly setting as they held onto the names, laws, and stories of a people who trusted the earth to remain exactly as it had always been. The tiny oil lamps that had flickered in the small courtyards had long since drowned in their own wax, leaving nothing but the pure, silver light of the stars to wash over the empty streets and abandoned marketplaces where the busy voices of the afternoon had dissolved into absolute peace. High atop the sacred towering terraces of the ancient ziggurat, the oldest astronomer finally lowered his tired eyes from the eternal constellations, closing them completely to let the heavy, rhythmic sound of the distant waves fill his mind, quiet his thoughts, and slow his breathing to match the pace of the earth. The southern wind blew one final time across the vast open brickwork, carrying a damp, incredibly cool weight that smelled of deep oceans, wild salt flats, and ancient, forgotten shores, long hidden from human sight since the very dawn of time. The entire universe seemed to hold its breath as the darkness reached its absolute. Heavy fullness, blending the infinite sky, the cooling earth, the deep river, and the vast sea into one continuous, borderless field of perfect, undisturbed stillness. The dreams of the sleeping Sumerian city drifted like the soft river mist itself, passing silently through the quiet, empty streets, rolling over the locked wooden doors, and crossing the deserted marketplaces, before vanishing forever into the velvet night. The ancient mud bricks grew completely cold under the heavy air. The silver stars slowly faded behind the gathering dampness of the heavy sky, and the deep, dark undercurrent of the great rivers continued its silent, eternal journey toward the dark horizon. And so, the land of Suma, with all its grand temples, its quiet fields, its sleeping children, and its unread clay stories, settled deeply into the last layer of deep sleep, entirely unaware that the ancient waters had already whispered their final warning to the silent stars, leaving the entire world to rest in the beautiful, complete, and timeless silence of the endless night. The deep silence held the land in absolute stillness, as if the world itself had forgotten how to wake. No bird stirred within the heavy reeds. No leaf moved in the dark orchards, and even the tiny flames of the stars seemed to freeze in their positions across the infinite black velvet of the high sky. The heavy, damp air from the south continued to press down upon the flat roofs of the sleeping city, sealing every home in a safe, unbroken pocket of complete rest, where time no longer had any meaning or power. Below the dark streets, the earth remained warm and thick, cradling the roots of the city and the foundations of the great temples, like a mother holding a child. In the dead of winter, the dark waters of the Euphrates and the Tigris moved as a single, massive body through the darkness, their currents so smooth and heavy that they made no sound at all. Against the earthen banks, flowing in total secret toward the edge of the world, everything that had been built, everything that had been written upon the clay, and everything that had been dreamed by the people lay perfectly still, waiting in the deep shadow of the ziggurat for a morning that felt incredibly distant. And in that final breathless hour, before the very first light, the ancient land rested in absolute completion, wrapped in the immense, comforting embrace of a timeless night that promised to last forever.